The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my 5-acre property, a patchwork of pine trees and open meadow that I dreamed of calling home. At 52, Daniel Carter, had sunk every penny of my savings into this land after a brutal divorce stripped me of my old life. No mortgage, no landlord, just me, a renewable energy consultant, ready to rebuild with a sustainable home and workshop. The modest house needed work, but its bones were solid, and the freedom of owning my land outright felt like a second chance. That is, until Ellen Harper pulled her sleek silver SUV into my gravel driveway. I was unloading solar panels from my truck when she stepped out, her tailored blazer and designer sunglasses, screaming money. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she called, her smile as polished as her vehicle. "I'm Ellen Harper, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, just over that hill." She gestured toward a cluster of cookie-cutter mansions visible beyond my property line. "Thought I'd stop by to go over a few community expectations before you settle in." I set down a panel and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Daniel Carter," I said, offering a handshake. "Nice to meet you, but I think there's a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of Willow Creek." Her smile tightened, just a flicker, but I caught it. "Well," she said, "the boundaries around here are a bit flexible. The previous owner had an informal agreement with us to maintain certain standards. It keeps everyone's property values up." Her tone was friendly, but her eyes were already scanning my land like she was mentally bulldozing it. I kept my voice steady. "I bought this place because it's independent. No HOA, no covenants. I'm planning a sustainable living workshop for my business, renewable energy systems." Ellen's expression shifted, her warmth dimming. "Oh, I see. Well, we do have aesthetic guidelines in our bylaws. Outbuildings, commercial activities, those kinds of things can impact the market value of surrounding homes." She glanced at my solar panels. "Perhaps we could find a compromise that works for your project while preserving our community's appeal." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a directive. I felt a prickle of irritation, but kept my cool. "It's not a project. It's my livelihood, and my property isn't under your bylaws. I checked the county records before buying." She gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Records don't always reflect the reality of neighboring communities, Mr. Carter. We have standards here. I hope you'll reconsider your plans." She handed me a glossy Willow Creek brochure and invited me to their next HOA meeting before driving off. I shoved the brochure in my pocket, but her words lingered like a warning shot. The next morning, I met my other neighbor, George Miller, a 65-year-old retiree whose land bordered mine on the opposite side. He leaned against my porch railing, sipping coffee I'd offered. "Saw Ellen's SUV here yesterday," he said. "Let me guess, she welcomed you, then told you how to run your own land." I nodded, surprised. "How'd you know?" George chuckled dryly. "Because she's been trying to expand her little empire for years. Willow Creek was supposed to be bigger, but the developer went bust. Ellen and her husband, Richard, bought up lots cheap, built their mansion, and now she's trying to control everything around it." "The guy who owned your place before? John Ramsey?" "He sold after 2 years of her nonsense." "Nonsense?" I asked, my coffee cup pausing midair. George's eyes narrowed. "Complaints to the county, letters, rumors that tanked his business. John wanted a wind turbine into green energy like you. Ellen made it her mission to stop him, said it'd ruin the community aesthetic. Be careful. She's a realtor with her own firm, and Richard's got pull at the County Planning Commission. They've got connections and aren't shy about using them." As George left, I spotted Ellen's SUV parked at the edge of my property. She was snapping photos of my house with her phone, not even pretending to be subtle. When our eyes met, she flashed a tight smile. "Just documenting the before for my real estate files," she called before driving off. I didn't know then that those photos would soon star in a Willow Creek HOA presentation titled Neighborhood Eyesore. 2 weeks later, an official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a letter on Willow Creek HOA letterhead listing aesthetic violations on my property, unfinished renovations, unauthorized solar installations, and equipment storage visible from their roads. It demanded a $750 community improvement fee and hinted at legal action if I didn't comply. I stared at the letter, torn between laughter and rage. I checked every county regulation, filed all permits, and confirmed my land was free of any HOA. This was pure audacity. I called my old college friend, Susan Brooks, a real estate attorney who lived for property disputes. After emailing her the letter and my documents, she called me back that night. "This is nonsense," Susan said. "They have no authority over your land. This borders on fraud, sending payment demands they can't enforce. I'll draft a cease and desist letter for their board. If they keep this up, we've got options." I sent the letter via certified mail, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. But 3 days later, a neighbor tipped me off about a private online group Ellen had created, Preserve Willow Creek's Charm. Screenshots showed unflattering photos of my renovations labeled property value threats, alongside rants about my industrial solar panels and rainwater systems. The online campaign spilled into real life. At the local hardware store, Willow Creek residents I'd met avoided eye contact. The coffee shop owner, where I'd been a regular, mentioned hearing about my junkyard and seemed surprised when I invited him to see my organized setup. Then came the county complaint. A notice taped to my door cited unsightly construction and environmental hazards from my equipment. The inspector, Tom Evans, arrived the next day, looking apologetic. "Let me guess," I said, walking him around. "Ellen Harper filed this." Tom sighed. "I can't say who, but this isn't my first rodeo out here. Your setup's fine, permitted, up to code, cleaner than most. I'll mark this resolved, no violations." His advice to document everything stuck with me. I installed security cameras around my property, an expense I hadn't planned but now felt essential. Good thing, too, because 2 days later, footage showed Willow Creek maintenance workers accidentally moving my survey stakes while trimming brush. Then, at 5:30 a.m., my security app pinged. Ellen, in designer athleisure, was in my mailbox, slipping in an envelope and snapping photos of my yard before jogging off. The envelope contained a community notice claiming my well tapped a shared aquifer and my rainwater system disrupted drainage. It demanded a $1,500 water impact fee and submission of my plans for HOA approval, or they protect shared resources. The document mimicked county letterhead but bore Ellen's signature and the Willow Creek logo. I was starting to see her playbook: fake documents, rumors, relentless pressure until you caved. But why me? I got a clue overhearing her giving a tour to buyers near my property line. "This area is being improved," she said, gesturing toward my land. "This property is under investigation, but we'll ensure it meets our standards or the county steps in." She was using me as a villain to sell her homes, painting herself as the hero who'd save Willow Creek from my eyesore. It was calculated, and I had to admit, almost impressive. The fake water notice pushed me over the edge. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. Ellen Harper was playing dirty, and I needed to fight back smarter. I called Susan Brooks again, sending her the latest document and my security footage. "This is escalating," she said, her voice sharp. "Trespassing, fraudulent seals, misrepresentation of county authority. These are serious. We need to file a police report, secure your property, and keep building your case." Her three-part plan made sense. Report the trespassing, add more cameras, and lock down my well system to prevent tampering. I wasn't thrilled about the extra costs, but peace of mind was worth it. The deputy who took my report, Officer Mark Thompson, was polite but skeptical. "Neighbor disputes are tricky," he said, scribbling notes. "No physical damage means it's a gray area. We'll document it and talk to MS. Harper, but don't expect miracles." I nodded, catching the subtext. Ellen and her husband, Richard, had clout, and the sheriff's department wasn't eager to wade into a suburban squabble. Still, the report was a start, another piece in my growing file. I doubled down on security, installing cameras with night vision and motion sensors. I also shut off external access to my well, adding my own seals labeled private property. Tampering will be recorded. With my first sustainable energy workshop scheduled for the next week, I couldn't risk disruptions. The workshop was a big deal. 10 clients paying to learn about off-grid systems, a step toward rebuilding my business. I wasn't letting Ellen derail it. The night before the workshop, I had double-checked everything. Solar panels aligned, rainwater system operational, presentation ready. But the next morning, as my clients arrived, a silver SUV roared into my driveway, followed by a black SUV with Willow Creek security magnets on the doors. Ellen stepped out in a crisp navy pantsuit, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts. "We're here for a water inspection," she announced, loud enough for my clients to hear. The county authorized Willow Creek to evaluate resource usage on adjacent properties. I stepped away from my group, keeping my voice calm. "Ellen, you know that's not true. This is private property, and you have no authority here. Please leave." She ignored me, motioning her security toward my well. When they found the access sealed, her face reddened. Without missing a beat, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report water theft and utility tampering," she said, her voice dripping with urgency. "The owner has illegally sealed access to community water resources." I stood there, stunned, as my clients whispered among themselves. She called emergency services because I'd secure my own well. 20 minutes later, Deputy Laura Bennett arrived, her expression one of barely concealed exasperation. "I understand there's a dispute about water access," she said, stepping between us. Ellen launched into her spiel. "This man has sealed off shared water resources that feed our community. It's utility tampering, a criminal offense. We have documentation proving his system is interconnected with Willow Creek." I handed Deputy Bennett my paperwork, property deeds, water rights certification, permits. "This is my private well on my private land," I said. "I sealed it because someone's been tampering with my equipment. The county water department can confirm my system's independent." Bennett called the county, her frown deepening as she listened. Turning to Ellen, she said, "Ma'am, I've verified this property has its own well, fully permitted. The owner can secure his utilities however he wants." Ellen didn't flinch. "He's running an illegal business. This workshop violates residential zoning." I produced my home occupation permit, which explicitly allowed educational workshops. Bennett's patience was visibly thinning. "Ma'am, that's not how property rights work," she said, her tone firm. Ellen's eyes narrowed, and her next words sent a chill through me. "This isn't over. My husband works with the County Planning Commission, and I've sold homes to half the zoning board. You made a big mistake." She stormed off, her security goons trailing behind. One of my clients, a gray-haired engineer, chuckled. "Is this drama part of the workshop fee? It's better than cable." The group laughed, but my stomach knotted. Ellen's threat wasn't empty. She had the connections to make my life hell. After she left, Deputy Bennett lingered. "Just so you know," she said quietly, "filing a false police report is an offense. I've noted everything, including her accusations. If this keeps up, you might have grounds for a harassment claim." I thanked her and returned to my clients, trying to salvage the workshop. As I was saying, I said, forcing a smile, "Energy independence comes with challenges, sometimes human ones." That evening, I spread every document I had across my kitchen table: permits, footage, county records, the fake notices. What started as precaution had become a mission. I'd been quietly building a case, cataloging every incident, cross-referencing regulations, and recording interactions. My manila folder was now a thick binder, each page a brick in the wall I was constructing. Ellen thought she could bully me into submission, but I wasn't John Ramsey. I wasn't folding. I reached out to a contact I'd been saving, a former client, Stephen Grant, now at the State Inspector General's office. If Ellen and Richard were leveraging local influence, I'd go above their heads. Stephen listened as I outlined the situation, promising to review my evidence. "This sounds like a pattern," he said. "If your documentation's as solid as you say, we'll take a hard look." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. 3 days later, the county hit me with a new complaint: unauthorized commercial activity in a residential zone. The notice included a cease and desist order, halting my workshops with potential fines of $1,000 a day. I was livid. My home occupation permit explicitly allowed this. After hours on the phone, I learned Richard Harper had filed the complaint through his planning commission role, bypassing checks on my permits. It was a blatant abuse of power, and unraveling it would mean slogging through bureaucracy. Susan was furious. "This is harassment through official channels," she said. "We need a comprehensive timeline. Every incident, every false report, every misuse of authority." I spent days compiling it. Photos, videos, fake notices, county correspondence. I added more cameras and a backup generator, half expecting Ellen to target my power next. Susan and I met with a county administrator, Diane Foster, who seemed sympathetic but cautious. "I'll investigate the permit mishandling," she promised, "but Richard's got friends in high places. You might need to explore other avenues." 2 days later, Susan called, her voice tight. "Diane's documentation packet. Our evidence. It's misplaced in the system." She was called into a meeting with her boss, who golfs with Richard. "They're burying it." I sank onto my porch steps, the sunset mocking my frustration. The system I trusted was rigged. "What now?" I asked. "We keep building the case," Susan said. "If the county's compromised, we go higher. We need to be strategic." That night, I barely slept, questioning if I'd made a mistake buying this land. Ellen's campaign was relentless, and I was one man against her network. But giving up meant letting her win, letting her control my life. I couldn't do that. George stopped by the next morning, reporting that Willow Creek had formed an aesthetic compliance committee that drove by daily, snapping photos. Local shop owners mentioned Ellen's whispers about my hazardous systems. The pressure was mounting, but it only steeled my resolve. I decided to dig into Ellen's history. County records showed John Ramsey had sold at a 20% loss after 2 years. I tracked him down in Florida. "You bought that place?" he said, his voice heavy. "Let me guess. Ellen Harper's making your life hell." I briefed him, and his bitter laugh said it all. "Same playbook. I wanted a wind turbine, all permitted. She filed complaints, spread rumors, even reported me for child endangerment over my equipment. I sold to escape. I'll send you my records, everything. She's not just annoying, she's methodical." John's files were gold. Fake notices, false complaints, proof of financial harm. I reached out to other victims, collecting statements. A pattern emerged. Ellen targeted properties that didn't fit her vision, using social pressure, bureaucracy, and borderline illegal tactics to force compliance or drive owners out. George admitted he'd caved years ago, spending $10,000 on unneeded upgrades to his garage to appease her. The more I learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. It was about exposing a system of intimidation. The evidence was piling up, but Ellen Harper wasn't slowing down. Her latest move was a public smear campaign, and I got a front row seat when I slipped into the back of a Willow Creek HOA meeting unannounced. The community center was packed, the air thick with the scent of coffee and self-righteousness. Ellen stood at the front, clicking through a PowerPoint that could have doubled as a horror show. My half-finished solar array filled the screen, captioned "Threat to our community's charm." She gestured dramatically, her voice rising. "This is what we're up against. Neighbors, unregulated eyesores that tank our property values." I gripped my laptop, heart pounding. She clicked to a digitally altered image of my property as a junkyard, rusted panels strewn across the lawn. The audacity was staggering, but it was also the push I needed. I stood, walking calmly to the front. "Since we're discussing community standards," I said, plugging my laptop into the projector, "I'd like to share some documents about how our HOA president operates." Ellen's face froze, cycling from shock to fury to a brittle smile. "We don't have time for unscheduled presentations," she snapped, trying to steer the room. I turned to the crowd. "I think you'll want to hear this, especially since you're being misled about property values, water rights, and more. I'm Daniel Carter, the guy with the so-called eyesore. What you don't know is that I've been harassed, trespassed on, and targeted with fraudulent claims since I moved in." Ellen tried to interrupt, but an older man, clearly fed up, raised his hand. "Let him speak, Ellen. I want to hear this." The room hushed as I pulled up my first slide. a timeline of every incident since I'd bought my land. For 15 minutes, I laid it out. Fake notices mimicking county letterhead, security footage of Ellen and her contractors on my property, false complaints to county agencies, and statement from prior victims, including John Ramsey. This isn't about aesthetics, I said. It's about control. My property's fully permitted. Sure. Ellen sputtered. He's twisting everything. These are standard HOA measures. But the crowd wasn't buying it. An older woman stood, placing fake county seals, filing false reports. That's not standard, Ellen. I pressed on, showing statements from other homeowners she'd targeted. This is a pattern. Your HOA president has been driving out anyone who doesn't fit her vision, whether they're in your association or not. The room grew restless. Some residents looked shocked. Others nodded, recognizing the playbook. Ellen's face paled as I revealed I'd already taken my evidence to the state inspector general's office. What you may not know, I said, is that these actions could make the entire HOA liable. If the board knew about this, every member could face legal consequences. That hit hard. HOA members share liability, and the idea of lawsuits rattled them. Richard Harper burst in, red-faced. You're threatening our community with twisted interpretations, he bellowed. I'm not threatening, I said coolly. I'm presenting facts, documented and shared with authorities. My final slide showed Ellen and Richard selectively enforcing rules against properties they wanted to control while ignoring violations by allies. This isn't about property values, I concluded. It's about power. And I suspect most of you didn't know this was done in your name. The meeting erupted. Board members huddled, whispering frantically. Residents peppered me with questions. Ellen and Richard stood isolated, their authority crumbling. As the crowd dispersed, my phone rang. It was Rachel Lee, a local lifestyle blogger. Check tomorrow's post, she said. I've got interviews with 6 homeowners about Ellen's tactics. Your solar panels aren't the only thing she's tried to kill. The next morning, a state vehicle pulled into my driveway. Inspector Alan Morgan stepped out, his face grim but satisfied. Over coffee, he said, "We executed search warrants at the Harper's home and the HOA office today. Your evidence corroborated multiple reports of fraudulent seals and false filings. We're looking at fines and potential criminal charges." I exhaled, relief mixing with caution. "What's next?" I asked. "Depends on what we find," he said, "but this is solid ground for civil harassment claims too." Rachel's blog post, "The Dark Side of Curb Appeal," dropped like a grenade. It detailed Ellen's harassment of multiple homeowners, with interviews from John Ramsey and others. Real estate ethics experts and attorneys weighed in, questioning her tactics' legality. The fallout was swift. 3 of Ellen's clients pulled their listings from Harper Properties, citing ethics concerns. The county launched a review of all zoning complaints tied to Richard. The HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership changes. George, my neighbor, attended and reported back. It was a bloodbath, he grinned. Once folks realized Ellen's stunts could cost them, her support vanished. The board booted both Harpers and pledged to cooperate with the state. 2 weeks later, the county validated my permits, dismissed all complaints, and apologized for administrative errors that let Richard's filing slide. My workshops were back on. The state's investigation bore fruit. Richard faced charges for fraudulent use of seals and interference with government operations. Not felonies, but enough to end his county consulting gig. An ethics review followed, stripping him of influence. Ellen escaped criminal charges, but her real estate business tanked. The local Realtors Association opened an investigation, and her license hung in the balance as former clients piled on complaints. My property's image flipped overnight. Once an eyesore, it was now a local media darling, showcased as a model of sustainable living. Homeowners, even some from Willow Creek, requested consults on solar and rainwater systems. The new HOA president, Margaret Evans, a retired environmental engineer, asked me to host a workshop for Willow Creek residents. Sustainable elements within aesthetic guidelines we can all live with, she said, extending an olive branch. George finally built his dream garage, and other homeowners revived plans Ellen had squashed. It's a renaissance out here, he joked, admiring his new siding. But the real test came 6 months later when Ellen's silver SUV pulled into my driveway. I braced for a fight, but she stepped out in jeans and a plain blouse, no power suit in sight. She surveyed my completed solar array and rainwater system, her expression unreadable. My clients keep asking about eco-friendly options, she said, avoiding my gaze. That blog post went viral. Everyone wants green features. She handed me her card. Could I bring some clients by to see this? I was floored. Ellen Harper, queen of curb appeal, wanted to tour my junkyard. That afternoon, as my workshop kicked off, she sat in the back taking notes. George nudged me, grinning. Never thought I'd see her learning about compost toilets. Later, I heard she'd rebranded Harper Properties to focus on sustainable luxury, and Richard took a job in green building certification. It wasn't the punishment I'd once craved, but it was something better. Ellen Harper's presence at my workshop lingered in my mind like a plot twist I hadn't seen coming. For months, I'd imagined justice as her downfall, her real estate empire crumbling, her reputation shredded, her husband's influence erased. Yet there she was, scribbling notes on solar panels and rainwater systems, the very thing she'd once called a neighborhood threat. At 52, I'd learned life rarely follows the script you write, but this was something else. It wasn't revenge, it was transformation, and it forced me to rethink what winning really meant. The fallout from the state investigation and Rachel Lee's blog post continued to ripple through our small town. Willow Creek's HOA was in chaos, scrambling to rebuild trust. Margaret Evans, the new president, was a breath of fresh air. She invited me to coffee at the local diner, a no-nonsense spot where farmers and retirees swapped stories over greasy hash browns. We're rewriting the bylaws, she said, stirring sugar into her mug. No more aesthetic tyranny. We want guidelines that encourage sustainability, not stifle it. Your workshop opened eyes, mine included. I was cautious but optimistic. I'm happy to help, but I'm not joining your HOA, I said, half joking. Margaret laughed. No chance of that. We just want to learn from you. Some residents are even talking about a community solar project. It was surreal. My property, once a pariah, was now a catalyst for change. I agreed to consult, sketching out ideas for small-scale green upgrades that wouldn't break the bank or clash with Willow Creek's polished look. Meanwhile, Ellen's world was unraveling, but not in the dramatic way I'd expected. Her real estate firm lost half its listings as clients jumped ship, spooked by the ethics probe. The local Realtors Association was digging into claims she'd manipulated property values with false complaints, and whispers around town suggested her license might be suspended. Richard's charges, fraudulent use of county seals and interference with government operations, carried fines and a permanent ban from county work. Their mansion, once a symbol of untouchable power, was quietly listed for sale, though no one was biting. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. I'd spent months building a case, fueled by anger at Ellen's relentless harassment. Now, with her influence gutted, I wondered if I'd been chasing the wrong kind of justice. My neighbor George had his own take. They're not done yet, he said, tinkering with his new garage door. Ellen's like a cat, lands on her feet. But you made her play by your rules. That's something. He was right. Ellen's rebranding as a sustainable luxury realtor was a survival move, but it meant she had to embrace the very principles she'd fought against. Every eco-friendly listing she pitched, every client she brought to my property, was a tacit admission she'd been wrong. It wasn't a courtroom victory, but it was a quiet, enduring one. Still, I kept my guard up, documenting every interaction, half expecting her to revert to old tricks. The community's shift was more tangible. My workshops were booked solid, drawing folks from Willow Creek and beyond. A local TV station ran a segment on my property, calling it a blueprint for sustainable living in suburbia. I fielded calls from homeowners wanting advice on solar panels, rainwater systems, even compost toilets. One Willow Creek resident, a retired teacher named Clara, invited me to her backyard barbecue. I owe you an apology, she said, passing me a burger. I bought Ellen's line about your place being an eyesore. Then I saw your workshop. You're not just building systems, you're building ideas. Her words stuck with me. I'd come to this land to rebuild my life after losing everything in my divorce. My savings, my kids' weekends, my sense of stability. Ellen's harassment had threatened that, but it also forced me to fight for something bigger. My property wasn't just a home. It was a statement about living on your own terms, about systems, energy or otherwise, that don't bend to bullies. But Ellen wasn't done testing me. A month after her workshop visit, I got a call from Rachel Lee, the blogger. "Heads up," she said. "Ellen's pitching a green community initiative to Willow Creek's board. She's citing your work as inspiration, but it smells like she's trying to claw back influence." I thanked Rachel and dug into it, pulling county records and HOA minutes. Sure enough, Ellen had proposed a sustainability committee, positioning herself as its chair. The plan looked legit: solar incentives, rainwater pilot programs, but her name at the top raised red flags. I called Margaret. "Is Ellen back in the game?" I asked. Margaret sighed. "She's trying. Some residents like the idea, but others smell a power grab. I'm keeping her on a short leash. Want to weigh in at the next meeting?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay clear, let Willow Creek sort its own mess. But I learned the hard way that ignoring Ellen was like ignoring a storm cloud. You get soaked eventually. The HOA meeting was standing room only, a mix of curious residents and wary holdouts. Ellen stood at the podium, her smile dialed back to humble. "I've learned a lot this year," she said, glancing my way. "Mr. Carter's work showed me sustainability can enhance our community. My proposal is about collaboration, not control." It was a good pitch, but I knew her too well to buy the act. I raised my hand. "I support green initiatives," I said, standing, "but any committee needs transparency. Ms. Harper has a history of using community standards to pressure neighbors, including me. If she's leading this, how do we know it won't be another control scheme?" The room buzzed. Ellen's smile tightened, but she didn't snap. "I understand the skepticism," she said. "I'm here to make amends, not repeat mistakes." Margaret stepped in. "We'll form the committee, but leadership will rotate, and all decisions will be public. No one person calls the shots." The crowd nodded, and Ellen's plan passed, but with her role diluted. As the meeting ended, she approached me, her expression unreadable. "I'm not your enemy anymore, Daniel," she said quietly. "I'm trying to adapt." I nodded, but didn't reply. Trust was earned, not gifted. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, my binder of evidence now a relic of a war mostly won. Susan called with an update. The county had settled my permit disputes, and the state was wrapping its investigation. "You've got grounds for a civil harassment suit," she said. "Could hit the Harpers hard financially." I considered it, but the idea felt hollow. Ellen was already living in the reality she'd tried to destroy. Every green listing she sold was a reminder of her defeat. That was enough. George's renaissance was in full swing. Clara installed solar panels. Another neighbor built a rainwater system, and Willow Creek's new bylaws allowed for sustainable diversity. My workshops became a hub for ideas, drawing people who wanted to rethink how they lived. I was no longer the outsider. I was part of something, a community not defined by Ellen's manicured vision, but by shared possibility. The morning sun glinted off my solar panels, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. At 52, I, Daniel Carter, had turned my 5-acre haven into more than a home. It was a beacon of resilience, a testament to standing firm against intimidation. The battle with Ellen Harper and her Willow Creek HOA had reshaped not just my life, but the entire community. As I prepped for another sustainable living workshop, I reflected on the strange arc of justice, one that didn't end in a courtroom, but in a subtler, more profound victory. Ellen's rebranding as a sustainable luxury realtor was the talk of the town. Her new listings touted solar panels and rainwater systems, a stark pivot from the cookie-cutter mansions she'd once championed. I'd heard she was pitching green upgrades to clients, even citing my workshop as inspiration. It was surreal watching her market the very ideas she'd tried to bury. Her husband, Richard, had settled into his green building certification job, a quieter role that kept him out of county politics. Their mansion was still on the market, price slashed, a silent admission their reign was over. I didn't trust Ellen's transformation, not fully. Her humility felt like a calculated move, a way to salvage her career after the ethics probe and lost clients. But I had to admit, she was playing by new rules. When she brought a young couple to my property for a tour, she was professional, asking smart questions about my systems. "This is the future," she told them, gesturing at my rainwater tanks. "It's practical and profitable." The couple signed up for my next workshop, and Ellen left without her usual edge. George, watching from his porch, chuckled. "She's eating crow one listing at a time." The Willow Creek HOA, under Margaret Evans' leadership, was unrecognizable. The new bylaws embrace sustainability, allowing solar arrays and green upgrades with minimal red tape. Margaret's community solar project gained traction, funded by residents who'd once backed Ellen's aesthetic crusade. At a recent meeting, Clara, the retired teacher, stood up and credited me. "Daniel showed us you can live differently without ruining the neighborhood," she said. "We're better for it." The applause caught me off guard, a warmth I hadn't expected. My workshops were thriving, drawing a mix of locals, city folks, and even a few Willow Creek residents. The local paper ran a feature, From Eyesore to Icon, detailing how my property sparked a suburban green revolution. I got emails from across the state, homeowners asking for advice or inviting me to speak. It was overwhelming, but it felt right, like I'd found my purpose after years of drift. My divorce had taken my kids' weekends and my savings, but this land gave me something to build, something that mattered. Still, I kept my binder of evidence, a reminder to stay vigilant. Susan Brooks checked in occasionally, updating me on the state's investigation. The Harpers had paid fines for the fraudulent seals, and Richard's charges were settled with probation. Ellen's realtor license survived, but under strict oversight. "You could still sue," Susan said. "They'd settle fast." I shook my head. "They're living with the consequences." "That's enough." She laughed. "You're a better man than me, Daniel." The community's healing was the real triumph. Properties once targeted by Ellen, George's garage, Clara's solar panels, were now celebrated for their individuality. A neighbor down the road built a wind turbine, something John Ramsey had dreamed of years ago. George called it the Great Unbuttoning, a neighborhood shedding Ellen's rigid vision for something vibrant and real. Even Willow Creek's manicured lawns sprouted rain gardens and native plants, small rebellions against conformity. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a beer, Margaret stopped by. "We're naming the community solar project after you," she said. "The Carter Array." "Too much." I laughed, embarrassed. "Way too much. Call it Willow Green or something neutral." She grinned. "Fine, but you're still the spark. People talk about you like you're some folk hero." I waved her off, but her words lingered. I wasn't a hero, just a guy who refused to fold. The final surprise came a year after the HOA showdown. Ellen emailed me, asking to meet at the diner. Against my better judgment, I went. She sat in a booth, no designer sunglasses, just jeans and a sweater. "I owe you," she said, stirring her coffee. "You could have destroyed me, sued, pushed the ethics board harder. You didn't." "What?" I leaned back, choosing my words. "Because I didn't want your ruin. I wanted you to see the truth, that people can live differently and still build something good. You're selling that now, whether you like it or not." She nodded, eyes down. "I hated you for a while. Thought you were ruining everything I'd built. But my clients, they want what you're doing. I had to change or lose everything." It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was honest. For the first time, I saw her not as a villain, but as someone caught in her own trap, forced to adapt or fade. "Keep learning," I said, standing. "The world's bigger than curb appeal." As I drove home, the weight of the past year lifted. Justice, I realized, wasn't about punishment. It was about forcing Ellen to live in the reality she'd tried to suppress. Every green home she sold, every workshop she attended, was a victory, not just for me, but for everyone she'd bullied. The community had changed, not because I won a fight, but because I'd shown them another way. My land was no longer a battleground. It was a classroom, a proving ground, a home. My kids, now visiting every other weekend, helped me plant a vegetable garden, their laughter filling the air. "Dad, this place is cool," my daughter said, hauling a bucket of compost. I smiled, knowing I'd built something worth fighting for, not just for me, but for them. The lesson was clear. Know your rights, document everything, and stand your ground. When someone like Ellen calls 911 over your own water supply, you don't just fight back. You build something so undeniable they have to reckon with it. Ellen did, and so did Willow Creek. The truth, it turns out, is the best revenge, not because it destroys, but because it reshapes. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a bully like Ellen, someone using power to silence or control? How did you handle it? Share your stories, especially about navigating harassment or injustice in your own life. Do you think justice is about punishment or transformation? Take a stand, and let's get the conversation going. Your voice matters.